The arrest. Marcus Johnson was awakened by the violent pounding on his apartment door in the early hours of a May morning. Rubbing his eyes, he stumbled toward the entrance, ready to remind whoever it was that it was barely 6 a.m. But the figures on the other side gave him no chance to speak. "Marcus Johnson, you're under arrest for the murder of Victor Hayes," announced the lead detective, his badge flashing in the dim hallway light. "You have the right to remain silent." The words faded into a buzzing in Marcus's ears as officers pushed into his small apartment. Everything moved in a surreal blur. The cold bite of handcuffs, neighbors peering from doorways, and the humiliating walk to the police car waiting outside. "There's been a mistake," Marcus kept repeating. "I didn't kill anyone. I don't even know who Victor Hayes is." The detective's eyes narrowed. "Save it for the judge, Johnson. We found your fingerprints at the scene." Marcus's mind raced frantically. He was a 26-year-old architectural design student working nights at a downtown restaurant to pay for his education. How could his fingerprints be at a murder scene? He'd never been in trouble with the law, not even a parking ticket. Second, presumed guilty. The trial was a nightmare of circumstantial evidence and implicit bias. The prosecution painted Marcus as a desperate man with mounting student debt who had broken into Hayes's home looking for valuables. When confronted by the wealthy businessman, they claimed Marcus had panicked and stabbed him. The fingerprints on a window frame, Marcus insisted, must have been from when he'd helped his friend Carlos with some renovation work 2 months earlier. Carlos, who did contract work for Hayes, confirmed this, but the prosecution dismissed it as a convenient story from a friend. What the jury saw was a young black man with no solid alibi for the night of the murder. What they heard was the emotional testimony of Hayes's widow, who needed someone to blame for her loss. What they missed was the rushed police investigation that overlooked crucial evidence and alternative suspects. Marcus's court-appointed attorney seemed overwhelmed and underprepared. He failed to effectively challenge the timeline of events or pursue leads about Hayes's business rivals. When the jury returned after just 4 hours of deliberation, Marcus knew what was coming. "We find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder." The judge's sentence came down like a hammer. 25 years. As he was led away, Marcus caught sight of his mother collapsing into his sister's arms, her face twisted in anguish. His girlfriend Aisha covered her mouth to stifle her sobs. In that moment, something hardened inside him. Third, walls and books. Blackwater State Penitentiary swallowed Marcus whole. The first year passed in a fog of rage and disbelief. He got into fights, spent weeks in solitary confinement, and wrote desperate letters to anyone who might help. Journalists, innocence projects, civil rights organizations. Most went unanswered. At night, he would lie awake, cataloging all he had lost: his education, his freedom, his future with Aisha, who stopped visiting after the first 6 months. The only constant was his mother, who made the 3-hour bus journey every other Sunday, despite her worsening arthritis. "Don't let this place eat you alive," she told him during one visit. "Find purpose, Marcus. If you let anger consume you, they win twice." Her words reached something deep inside him. The following week, he applied for a position in the prison library. The elderly librarian, a lifer named Jackson, recognized something in the young man's eyes. "What are you looking for?" Jackson asked when Marcus requested books on criminal law. "Justice," Marcus replied simply. Jackson smiled sadly. "Then you've got a lot of reading ahead of you." Marcus devoured everything he could find: criminal procedure, constitutional law, case histories of wrongful convictions. He filled notebooks with insights and strategies. When the prison's limited resources proved insufficient, he wrote to law schools requesting donated textbooks. 3 years into his sentence, he enrolled in a correspondence paralegal course. 5 years in, he was helping other inmates with their legal paperwork. 7 years in, he successfully appealed his own case to the state Supreme Court on a procedural technicality, not enough to free him, but enough to keep hope alive. 4. The Fire Within. 8 years into his sentence, Marcus received the news that broke him. His mother, his rock and only remaining connection to the outside world, had passed away suddenly from a stroke. She would never see him free. She had died still believing in a justice system that had failed her son. For weeks, Marcus retreated into himself. Jackson worried he might attempt suicide and kept close watch. But what emerged from that dark period wasn't despair. It was determination, burning like a steady flame. "I need everything you can find on the rules of evidence and recent precedents on reopening cases based on ineffective counsel," Marcus told Jackson one morning. The older man nodded, recognizing the transformation. "You're going all the way, aren't you?" "I'm going to be the lawyer I never had," Marcus answered, "and then I'm going to walk out of here a free man." He applied for the prison's limited educational release program to take the LSAT. His score was in the 95th percentile. With advocacy from a prison reform organization, impressed by his legal assistance to other inmates, he was granted the extraordinary right to apply to law schools. Letters of rejection came first. No institution wanted to take a chance on a convicted murderer. Then, a small law school with a social justice mission offered him conditional acceptance to their correspondence program. The dean, after reviewing his case files, became convinced of his potential innocence. For 4 more years, Marcus studied 18 hours a day. Fellow inmates began calling him counselor. Guards who had once viewed him as just another troublemaker now brought him their own legal questions. All the while, he built his own case file, meticulous and thorough, examining every piece of evidence, every transcript, every possible legal avenue. 13 years after his wrongful conviction, Marcus Johnson passed the bar exam from prison. The Return. The courtroom fell silent as Marcus entered, not in prison garb, but in a donated suit that hung loosely on his frame. The judge, not the same one who had sentenced him, looked skeptical as she reviewed the unusual petition before her. "Mr. Johnson, you wish to represent yourself in this motion for a retrial based on newly discovered evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus answered, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "As a licensed attorney in this state, I am qualified to do so." The prosecutor tried to hide his smirk. "Your Honor, this is clearly a publicity stunt. The evidence against Mr. Johnson was overwhelming 13 years ago, and nothing material has changed." But Marcus had done his homework. Through dogged research, and with help from a small innocence project, he had uncovered what his original attorney had missed. Hayes had been involved in fraudulent real estate dealings with a partner who had fled the country shortly after the murder. The fingerprint evidence had been contaminated. A neighbor's security camera footage, never properly examined, showed a different man entering Hayes's home the night of the murder. For 3 days, Marcus presented his case with a lawyer's precision and a wronged man's passion. He cross-examined the original detectives, revealing their rush to judgment. He presented expert testimony on fingerprint evidence that contradicted the state's narrative. He showed how his court-appointed attorney had failed to investigate key witnesses or challenge critical evidence. On the final day, as he delivered his closing argument, Marcus looked directly at the jury. 13 years ago, this system failed me. It saw only what it expected to see, a young black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. But today, I stand before you not just as a defendant, but as living proof that justice delayed need not be justice denied. The evidence speaks for itself. The truth has always been there, waiting for someone to care enough to find it. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the forewoman could barely meet his eyes. We find the defendant not guilty. Outside the courthouse, beneath a sky he hadn't seen without bars for 13 years, Marcus faced the media cameras with dignity. Today is not just a victory for me, he said quietly. It's a reminder that our system is only as just as we demand it to be. I lost 13 years of my life. My mother died believing her son was a murderer. No verdict can restore what was taken. But from today forward, I intend to ensure that what happened to me happens to as few people as possible. 6. The uncertain freedom. Freedom felt foreign. The world had accelerated during his absence. Smartphones, social media, politics that seemed from another reality. His small apartment, rented with help from the Innocence Project, felt too large after years in a cell. He would wake at 5 a.m. disoriented, expecting the morning count. The settlement from his wrongful conviction lawsuit provided financial stability, but money couldn't bridge the gap between the life he'd lost and the one he now faced. His architecture dreams felt like another person's memories. Aisha had married and moved to California. His sister, consumed by her own struggles, had become a stranger. Friends had moved on, built careers, started families. At 39, Marcus felt simultaneously too old and too young, a man out of time. He began volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping those who couldn't afford representation. The director, Sophia Washington, a veteran civil rights attorney, recognized his unique perspective. You explain complex legal concepts to clients in a way they actually understand, she observed after watching him work. That's rare. I remember what it's like to be on the other side of the legal jargon, Marcus replied, to have your life hanging on words you don't understand. 3 months after his release, he received an unexpected call from a young man named Deshaun Williams, facing charges similar to those Marcus had once confronted. My grandmother said you might help me, Deshaun explained. She said you know what it's like. Marcus hesitated only briefly before agreeing to review the case. He found the same patterns: rushed investigation, implicit bias, overworked public defender. Within weeks, he had uncovered exculpatory evidence the police had overlooked. When the charges against Deshaun were dropped, something shifted in Marcus. That night, he called Sophia. I think I'm ready, he told her. 7th, Phoenix Legal Collective. 6 months later, Marcus opened the Phoenix Legal Collective in a modest storefront in his old neighborhood. The name represented his own rebirth and his commitment to helping others rise from the ashes of injustice. The collective specialized in criminal defense for the underserved and in reviewing potential wrongful conviction cases. Marcus partnered with 2 young idealistic attorneys, a forensic specialist, and a network of law students eager to learn from his unique experience. Their first major victory came when they freed a woman who had spent 7 years in prison for a robbery committed by her abusive ex-boyfriend. Their reputation grew. Cases began coming in from across the state. Marcus's approach to law was unlike anything the courts had seen. He combined meticulous preparation with profound empathy for his clients. Judges who initially viewed him with skepticism came to respect his thoroughness and integrity. Even prosecutors who opposed him acknowledged his unique ability to humanize defendants that the system had reduced to case numbers. You're not just changing outcomes, Sophia told him after watching him win a seemingly impossible case. You're changing how people think about justice. But the work took its toll. Marcus drove himself relentlessly, sleeping little, taking on too many cases. The nightmares from prison never fully disappeared. Sometimes he would find himself back in his cell, the years of freedom just a cruel dream. You can't save everyone, his therapist warned him during one of his infrequent sessions. I know, Marcus replied, but I have to try. 8. Return to the source. 3 years after opening the collective, Marcus received a call about a potential client at Blackwater, the prison where he had served his time. The man, like Marcus, claimed innocence and had exhausted his appeals. Marcus hesitated. He hadn't returned to Blackwater since his release. The thought of walking through those gates again, even as a visitor, made his chest tighten. "I'll take someone else with me," he told his assistant. "Schedule it for next week." But when the day came, he went alone. The visiting room looked smaller than he remembered. The guards, several new faces mixed with a few he recognized, regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. One, Officer Rivera, had been kind to him during his darkest days after his mother's death. "Never thought I'd see you back here voluntarily, Johnson," Rivera said, extending his hand. "Neither did I," Marcus admitted. His potential client, Andre Collins, entered with the wary look of a man who had learned not to hope. Marcus recognized that look. He had worn it himself for years. "Why would you take my case?" Andre asked after Marcus introduced himself. "Nobody else will touch it." "Because 13 years ago I sat where you're sitting," Marcus answered simply, "and someone finally believed me." As they talked, Marcus felt something unexpected, a sense of coming full circle. The prison that had nearly broken him had also forged him into who he was now. Every painful lesson, every hour of study, every moment of despair had led to this moment, sitting across from a man who needed exactly what he could provide. That evening, as Marcus drove away from Blackwater for the second time in his life, he thought about his mother. He wished she could see him now, not just free, but purposeful. The system had taken so much from him, but it hadn't taken his capacity to help others. Perhaps that was its own form of justice. In his office late that night, reviewing Andre's case files, Marcus opened his desk drawer and took out a worn photograph, himself and his mother on his college graduation day, both beaming with pride and possibility. Beside it, he placed his law license. "I made it, Mom," he whispered. "Different path than we planned, but I made it." Outside, the city continued its restless pace. Inside, Marcus Johnson, former inmate number 2-47891, now attorney at law, prepared once more to fight for someone the world had forgotten. The fire that had begun in his prison cell years ago burned steady and bright, illuminating a path through darkness for others to follow. Ninth, the legacy. 5 years after founding Phoenix Legal Collective, Marcus stood before the state Supreme Court arguing a landmark case that could change how evidence was handled in potential wrongful conviction reviews. The collective had grown to a team of 15 with offices in 3 cities. They had helped free 17 wrongfully convicted individuals and prevented countless unjust convictions through aggressive pretrial representation. As he made his closing argument, Marcus thought about the long journey from that May morning when officers had pounded on his door. He was no longer defined by what had been done to him, but by what he had chosen to do in response. "Justice is not merely the absence of injustice," he told the justices. "It requires active vigilance, humility to recognize errors, and courage to correct them, no matter how much time has passed." The case would eventually establish new precedent, making it easier for those with claims of innocence to access DNA testing and other forensic reviews. Newspapers would call it Marcus Johnson's legacy, but he knew better. His true legacy lived in the faces of those who walked free because of his work, in the reforms gradually reshaping a flawed system, and in the younger attorneys he mentored who would carry the fight forward. One evening, after a particularly grueling case, a young law student who had been interning with the collective approached him. "How do you keep going?" she asked. "After everything you've been through, I would be so angry." Marcus considered her question carefully before answering. "I was angry for a long time," he admitted. "Anger kept me alive in there. But at some point, I had to decide whether that anger would consume me or fuel something better. He glanced around the office where his team was still working late, reviewing cases, preparing motions, making calls to clients' families. The system took 13 years of my life, he continued. I wasn't going to let it take whatever time I have left. The greatest revenge against injustice isn't more injustice. It's creating justice where there was none before. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new battles against a system resistant to change. But tonight, in this moment, Marcus Johnson was exactly where he needed to be, not defined by his past imprisonment, but by his present purpose. The fire that had begun in a prison cell had become a beacon, drawing others to its light and warmth. It would burn for as long as it was needed, illuminating dark corners of a system that too often confused punishment with justice, and reminding those trapped within it that being forgotten was not the same as being gone. For Marcus Johnson, that was enough. It had to be.